Hi, everyone. Hey, Lids. Welcome to our next episode of People Are the Worst, the show where leadership meets reality, because navigating people and people problems isn't just part of the job, it is the job. Join us today as we tackle the messy, the maddening, and the downright ridiculous, and explore how to lead through it all with clarity, courage, and maybe some caffeine. I'm Lucy.
And I'm Lindsay. And today we're going to discuss how managers can build more trust on their team, encouraging risks and debate, and how to ask for feedback, which we all love to hear.
We do indeed. Feedback is a gift, Linz.
Oh, yes, of course.
I'm liking your blue sweater today.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, very nice and summery. Very nice. Very nice. So what have we got for today?
All right. So here's the deal. Michael wrote in and asked us, how can I encourage my team to take more risks and adopt a more entrepreneurial mindset at work? I'm pretty happy with team performance when I give direction, but I think the next step is to have my team continue to dictate where we should be going for their respective areas of expertise. Perhaps there's something around empowerment and enabling risk-taking or de-risking failure.
Okay, so it sort of sounds like the team's kind of generally doing quite well, but they're not kind of taking the lead. They're not being that proactive. They're not, as he says, like dictating where we should be going as a team, especially if they have like particular expertise. It sounds like Michael may be a little bit more of a senior leader and he has some more experience on his team than some of the more junior managers might. But I think the first thing, when you want people to take more risks, when you want people to lead the direction of the team a little bit more, when you want people to feel empowered and enabled in that way, the first main thing that I see managers doing is getting in the way themselves without realizing. And so the first question to ask is it you? Like, is it me? As a people manager, people tend to adopt entrepreneurial mindsets when they feel that they actually have control and ownership. So do they have control and ownership? It's really easy to think that you are giving your team members that, when in fact, you're actually not as much as you think you are. Have you really got out of their way? I had an interesting coaching session a little way back now on this with a real powerhouse, really, of a founder. And she was getting really frustrated with her team. They weren't being proactive. They weren't really making decisions without her constant input. And when we really dug in, she realized that she was actually quarterbacking every single decision that the team was making. She was micromanaging these situations that didn't need her opinions in. She was even making minor changes to documents that didn't really need changing at all. And people just didn't have the space or the safety to take risks and make their own decisions.
Yeah, totally. It's so true. It's sometimes we do these things that have very unintended consequences, right? Like we think we're being helpful. We're like, oh, well, I'll just look it over. And then you're in the doc and, like, well, I might as well just change this. It's minor. So not a big deal, but that again is not giving people the room, right? It looks like you're, feeling like you need to check in on every detail.
Yeah, exactly.
I find this really what this backs up to, if you will, if you zoom out a little bit, it's just the end of the day, it's just expectation setting, right? And being really clear about where people have authority and where they don't. And I hear this a lot when people are like, oh, I really want my team to develop, an ownership mindset, like act like an owner, have an enterprise mindset. And I think that one of the most important things of that is you got to be really clear. Like, what does act like an owner mean, right? Because they're often not an owner.
Right. So, it's really nebulous.
Right. Yeah. Like, what are you looking for? Like, what does that mean in a day-to-day, like in their day-to-day, right? And so maybe an example would be like, it's important that everyone acts like an owner on this team. Let me give you an example of how that would show up, right? Acting like an owner means that you see a challenge that the business is happening, or you identify a problem and you come with a solution, right? You're like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's the data. Here's what I think we should do. What are your thoughts, right? It's very different than just coming to Michael in this situation, if you will, and just letting him know that, hey, FYI, this isn't working, right? Like that's not that's not an ownership mindset. So I think just getting really clear about, well, what are you really asking for? Like, what do you want, and what don't you want?
Yeah. Yeah. Because people do find it hard to see, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to know what acting like an owner looks like, or taking risks looks like in the context of the small team that you're on, or maybe even the larger team that you're on. And people think that it's very much something which is only for founders or only for C-level. But actually, it really isn't. And when we think about running high performing teams or building high performing teams, giving people, exactly as you say, those like clear expectations and what that looks like, and like is really important. And I think actually it kind of triggered something that you said then, that actually it does mean, if you want people to think like an owner, that not only do you need to set those expectations, but they've got to see data that they might not otherwise see. So kind of like being open about what you're seeing from leadership, being a little bit more open, making sure that everybody sees all the broader context. It's quite hard to think like an owner as a manager unless you have that kind of additional context.
Yeah, love that. Love that. I also thought Michael was onto something when he was just mentioning, like, maybe it's de-risking, right?
Yeah.
I think there is something that. So I think also one more thing about setting expectations is what might seem like a risk, what might not seem like a risk to you as, let's say, at the founder, as the boss, may very well feel like a big risk to someone on your team, based on like their level of how senior they are, also just their own experience. Like maybe they had experience in the past where they went out on a limb, they took a risk, and then they got in real trouble, right? So they've got this sort of PTSD from it. So I think too, like, if you want them to act like an owner in certain parts, then also de-risking that. So for example, let's just say you want them to have more ownership in pricing. Like you don't want them to run it by you every time, right? It's like, just run with it. I trust you. I think it can be really helpful to give some guardrails. So it's like, all right, you own pricing your proposals. As long as you have a gross margin that's above X, like I have your back, go forth, right? And so just being really clear, because again, they just, it might feel like a mask of risk to them where you're like, just, it's fine. You're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Like, we'll be good, So again, guardrails and finding out, like, also just asking them, like, what feels like really a big risk to you? You feel uncomfortable making, like what decisions feel risky to you that you don't feel confident making, and listen to that. And then you might quickly be able to figure out like what guardrails can you put in place so that they can be more empowered and move faster.
Yeah. And I think once you kind of like set the motions in place, you've thought about like how you can de-risk it, and you've set really clear expectations, and you've made sure that you are getting out of the way. Then you've got this kind of reinforcement piece, which is like, well, how do I keep it going? How do I keep people feeling like they're on the right track with owning decisions and taking risks and being creative and that kind of thing? And I think you've got two main tools at your disposal for this. One of them is praise, which, Lindsay and I are, for those of you who know us, are huge proponents of this, and we hope we do it well in our own businesses and in our own lives. But it really does help reinforce the behaviors that you want to see. So when you see someone demonstrating risk taking, making sure that you're praising that. Like, I was so delighted to see that you took that risk, and this is what happened. The wider impact was it actually pushed the team to think a little bit differently about where our product is going. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Make sure that you're doing a good quality praise there, rather than just saying like, hey man, great job. Right. And I think, you can be praising things like an entrepreneurial mindset, the risk taking that you're seeing, encouraging others, if you see them encouraging others to take some risks, or being an owner, when you see that entrepreneurial like ownership come out, anything that really helps you on that path that you're noticing them doing well, pulling it out, taking the time to write a praise for them, prepping it ahead of your one-on-one so that you remember to do it as well is a huge piece. And then I think the other tool at your disposal there is to make sure that you are staying true to enabling that info. And if you do have a tendency to slip in and micromanage, or you do have a tendency to be like really quick off the bat on making decisions, that you're really checking yourself constantly, being like, am I genuinely still enabling the behaviors that I want to see from my team? Or did I get out of the way at the beginning, but I'm creeping back into everybody's way again? So I'd say those are the two things that I'd think about to reinforce this over time.
Nice. Awesome. So just to recap, it sounds like one is check your own actions, right? Like, where am I getting in the way? Where am I not getting in the way?
Yeah.
Two is expectation setting. So make it really clear as to where they can act like an owner, and then what does acting like an owner mean, right? Yeah. And then making sure that you de-risk those situations for them. So give them the guardrails to enable them to do it. And then lastly, when you see them do it, definitely, praise that to make sure that they know that you notice it and they're on the right track.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Okay. So this one's different, but similar in the sense of kind of at the bottom of this, I think is a lot about building trust with your team. So, Rhonda was sharing recently that she feels like her team meetings, I'm sure some people can relate to this, feel a bit, silent. So, she feels like she feels confident in her structure where they all start with a bit of a check-in and some team updates. And then she'll end up putting discussion items where she genuinely wants people to engage so that they can work through things in the team meeting. So the team meeting feels more productive, right? As a result. But she's finding that people don't, like, it gets quiet. And people aren't really investing in the conversation and bringing their opinions and debating it such that at the end of it, they can really come to a decision where she feels like she's gotten everyone heard. And it's interesting because people will come to her on a one-on-one basis, share their opinion or maybe like disagree with something. But when it comes to a team setting where she wants everyone to get their feedback, and it just feels very much like a report out meeting as opposed to a working session.
Like a conversation. Yeah.
Where you're like building on people's ideas and you can really, at the end, you're like, okay, great. This was super helpful, right? Move forward. Instead, it ends up being quite tactical, I guess, or just, it's a bit stifled.
Well, it sounds like at the heart of all of this is probably the sort of psychological safety on the team. It doesn't sound like she has a sort of psychological safety issue one-on-one, if they're coming one-on-ones, but as a group of people working together, that group obviously doesn't feel that comfortable. How comfortable are the people to take risks, to ask questions? And often when there's a lack of psychological safety on a team, you're noticing an absence of a lot of these things. In fact, you're quite right. The question from Rhonda is quite similar to the one we had from Michael earlier that we just talked about, because I feel like, building trust and psychological safety when you're trying to encourage an entrepreneurial mindset is also kind of forms this bedrock. So Michael, if you're still listening, I hope you find this piece helpful too. So the first tip, I'd say, I've kind of got three that are springing to mind at the moment, but Linz, I'm sure you can jump in with some more. But so first tip is just making sure to enable psychological safety that we're modeling our own vulnerability here, because that's a huge part, so that a team can see that it is really safe to be vulnerable with each other. And actually, when you're engaging in a debate, what you are is sort of being inherently vulnerable, because you're putting your ideas out for somebody else to then critique. So you want to show people that it is okay to make mistakes in that group setting, So what does that really look like? How does it sound when you're doing that? Well, it's things like saying, I don't know. Invite that dialogue into the conversation, ask for help in those team meetings, bring something to the team that you're saying, look, I don't know what to do here. Like, what would you suggest? Help me with some of your expertise that we have here, and make sure that it is something that you obviously genuinely want some help with, and you haven't already figured out the answer to, because then that sounds quite inauthentic if you're doing it that way. So you're just trying to pull other voices in. Other ways that it sounds to be vulnerable is like owning your own mistakes, apologize where you may have made a boo-boo, where it's appropriate. So I think, and when you get used to modeling that vulnerability on the team, you will find that people will start to naturally do that a little bit more. It's like a license for them to be able to get on board with that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably tip 2, I'd say, is this is kind of similar to the praising the behaviors part that we talked about with Michael's question here, but being inclusive and acknowledging the input that people do put in a group meeting perspective. So when you're in a meeting, say things like, "Oh, that is a really great idea. I'm so glad you brought that up," or, "Well, thank you for pushing back on that," especially when you're seeing those moments of debate, or, I'm so glad you asked me that question. Those kinds of things where you're reinforcing the questions, the debate piece, the honest feedback that you might be getting about an idea, and just making sure that you're giving room to those other voices, being inclusive. Heidi, I haven't heard much from you recently, and I know that you have deep expertise in this area. Like, what do you think? Do you agree with what Sam has said? So that you're kind of really making sure that you're calling on people and pulling from their expertise. And I think the last one, when you're trying to encourage psychological safety, keep that kind of debate going, is to genuinely just ask somebody else on the team to play devil's advocate to something else that their team member or their peer has shared. And that's just to get a different perspective. I love what you said here, but, Stacey, how would you respond if you were just going to play devil's advocate to that idea for a moment? And it creates this very safe space in order to sort of perform debate so that people get used to hearing how it sounds and feels. It's a fun way for people to get used to disagreeing with each other.
Yeah, totally. A couple other thoughts. These are a bit more nuanced, but in my own experience, I've noticed this is that you also have to look at like how formal are your meetings. So I think part of being vulnerable is actually not coming to the table with everything all polished and having a deck for your team meeting. I think that can surprisingly be, even though, you think you're like, oh, I'm bringing the whole team together, I want to show them that I'm prepared. It ends up making it feel much less organic and conversational. So you've got to think like, what am I really want out of these team meetings?
Yeah.
And if you are looking for them to be working sessions where you really can get input on something, I think you have to be mindful of what is the culture of the meeting. So if you're at the point when you've got discussion topics and you're showing slides and you've prepared all this data, it makes people feel, oh, wait, did I need to prepare some data? Maybe I need to have a very well-informed opinion on this. And so they're more guarded, right? To be able to just share and riff. And so I think that just be mindful of what is sort of the culture of the meeting. And maybe less is more. I've learned this myself.
Lindsay's really into docs, everybody, by the way. So she's very prepared with great lengthy docs. So I'm like, wait, what? I need a picture, man. I need something else to take my brain out of this like stack of words.
So yeah, the other thing too, which I think we've learned at Elevate is at the end of the day, if you want people to bring their ideas to the table, right, is you got to set people up for success. And some people are speak to think, and some are think to speak, right? So speak to think, right? That's that, like, they just love a good brainstorm. They are so excited. I know Lucy and I are both guilty of this. So
we're both the same, unfortunately, in this.
Yeah. So we're like, wait, what's wrong? Like, what do you mean? We'll just pop the question in the moment and expect people to have all these great responses, right?
Yeah.
So, while others, right, like they want time to prepare. And so, they really think before they speak. Good for them. How thoughtful.
More mature.
Yeah, right. And so I think it's really important to know who's on your team. And this can be as simple as, like, generally speaking, are you a speak to think or a think to speak, right? And if you've got people, even if it's just one that is prefers to think to speak, you got to honor that. And so if you have that on your team, then, and I mean, you probably do, probably at least one person, then what you need to do is just, that's where like the doc does come in handy, see? And in the agenda, right? Just pop in like working conversation or group discussion and just put the question in advance. And so you just give them time to come with their thoughts. So just know your team, right? And set everyone up for success.
Yeah. And on the vein, I think, of knowing your team, Amy Edmondson, who a lot of you may have heard of, she really coined the phrase psychological safety, and a lot of work of her work and her team at Harvard Business School has gone into really, forwarding our understanding of this. She has got a really great team psychological safety survey, and it's actually the ones that she used with hundreds of teams to gauge their level of psychological safety on the team. And we'll put a version of this in the show notes for you so that you can take it. So if you are wondering what the psychological safety is like for folks on your team, you're wondering how you're doing in that regard and how people really feel on a day-to-day basis, then I'd really encourage you to take this survey, because it really is illuminating. Linz and I thought that we were like, well, we've got great psychological safety on our team. And then in an offsite, we actually gave people this psychological safety survey to do. And we realized that it wasn't as great as we thought it was. It was a very humbling moment where there were some incredibly helpful and useful insights that came out of it, which we could then all talk about, which made things much better. So
Totally.
Even if you think you've got great psychological safety, we'd still suggest that you take it. So as I say, in the show notes for you to have a look at, super simple. I think it's just 7 questions.
Yeah. And one more note on that, I'd give this advice to Rhonda, is that if you, particularly in a team dynamic, right, where it's like, it's not just one person that you can just go have a chat with, right? The power of a survey should not be, what's the right word? Bottom line is like, just ask. Like we try to make a lot of assumptions, right? We try to take a lot on our own. And like, at the end of the day, just put together a quick Google form. People don't even have to put their name in if they don't want, but
Right.
just ask, be like, what do you like about the team meeting right now? Like what's working for you? What's helpful? And then what's not helpful? What would you like to change? And then say like, I really want help. Like I want our working sections to be to really for people to debate and discuss, and just say what can we do? How can we change the meeting to invite that? And so when in doubt, like don't try to figure this stuff out on your own. Just get feedback. Like, just put out a Google. I'm also a big fan of Google Forms, but just ask. Like just ask and give people the space to weigh in, and it can be incredibly illuminating. We make a lot of assumptions that are incorrect. So
yeah,
totally. Than it is.
Take the guesswork out.
Totally.
Okay, let's change topic gears here. And we have a question from Natalie, and she asks, when is the right time to ask for feedback from your team? Actually, kind of changing gears, but also
I think that's segue.
This was a great segue, intentionally, yeah. So she asks, how often should managers be checking in, and what is the best way to go about this? It's quite hard actually sometimes to ask for feedback, and it's really tempting just to ask for it in quite a generic way. So what would you say, Linz?
So I think, first of all, if I had Natalie live right now, I'd probably be like, well, what feedback are you really looking for? And that would really determine the nature of the time at which you ask. So for example, right, you're looking for feedback on how am I doing as a manager, or how could I better support my team's, personal growth? Like that feels like maybe every 2-3 months, right? And that type of feedback, I would absolutely ask for in advance, right? So you'd be like, hey, I really want to know what about my management style is serving you right now, and how am I getting in your way, right? Or so you got to give people space and time to think about that. Generally, though, so some tips that still relate to that when you want feedback is so one is giving people time ahead of time to give you feedback, or at least creating a rhythm to the feedback. So we actually just ran one of our trainings. We have a feedback workshop, on how to give, receive feedback. And one of the things that came out of that when we ran it as a team was just a great reminder of how helpful it can be just to create a feedback section in your one-on-one doc and make that two-way feedback. So it's like feedback, like plus delta, right? And that is the same thing as giving people time in advance, because it's just sort of, you're building it into the rhythm. And sometimes you won't always have feedback. That's fine. But it's that reminder, it's that placeholder. And so it just normalizes feedback. It doesn't become this huge thing. The other thing on that is that I'm laughing already because I have a hard time saying this word, but you want to make sure that you ask for specific feedback.
Nearly.
Yeah, really. Specific feedback.
This is a slight in-joke, just as a pause here, because we filmed a lot of learning library classes, which we lovingly call Elevate Academy, and there's been a lot of scripts where we've written specifically, is a word, into the script, and poor Lynn's, it's like her nemesis word. It's like she nearly says it right each time, but mostly not most of the time. And then we even had to get you to dub it over, where you had to just record the word over and over again. Ah, I love you. Okay, carry on.
So anyway, the point is that you want to ask for specific feedback instead of generic feedback, right? So like, do you have any feedback for me? Like, good luck, my friend. Do you know what I mean? It's just way too general, right? It's like, do you have any feedback on how I ran that team meeting? Do you have any feedback on how the quarter went? Like, what did you like? What did you not like? And so you got to narrow it down, really think about like, what do you really want feedback on, and ask for that.
Even more granular, like, in the team meeting yesterday when I was explaining the new roadmap, how do you feel it landed? Like really granular stuff.
Totally. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I also would encourage, one thing we've done also at Elevate, which I found super helpful. Granted, it depends on the size of company. But what we do is every quarter, we actually just do a feedback survey, and we're like, what did you like about this quarter? What annoyed you about this quarter? What feedback do you have for Lucy and I? What's one thing you think you really do you think the business should lean into more, that you're excited about? Or where do you think you can have the highest impact on the business this quarter, right? And so, just taking a pause so one, when you talk about timing and stuff like that, I think like quarterly is a nice cadence for more of the, like, we want you to zoom out. Then of course we always at our quarterly kickoff meetings, we share all the feedback. So we amalgamate the themes and everything like that and share it out. Like, what's working? What do people like? What's not working? And then they can see it pulled through the KRs for the quarter.
Yeah.
But that a quarterly cadence is like, it's a great opportunity to really zoom in. And I'm always amazed by how much, again, going back to our earlier comment, like, don't just ask, like, don't think you have to figure it all out. I mean, I've just been shocked by sometimes the responses, and I'm like, oh, wow, I had no idea we were doing that. Like, my bad, or maybe I just wasn't even aware of something. Right. And so when in doubt, ask for feedback. Yeah. And the greatest thing too you can do is model it as like a founder or a manager, right? Like, it just normalizes it and makes it part of your values.
Yeah. And for those of you looking for these questions can kind of mature as they go. But for those of you who are even looking for like a simpler framework, just, what's one thing I should stop doing? What's one thing I should start doing? And what's one thing I can continue to do because it's working well for you? Even just those three simple questions, if you wanted to start somewhere, is super useful. And I think the more you ask for feedback as a manager, the more comfortable, firstly, you will be receiving it. It often, everyone always says, oh, I love feedback. I welcome feedback. Wait, no. Sometimes it's horrible hearing feedback. This is really true, but you will get more comfortable hearing it. And plus, the important thing is the more comfortable your team will feel giving it to you. And you will start to see that. It'll be slow to start with. You can't expect them to just suddenly turn on a dime. But over time, over the weeks and months and quarters, you will really see the culture of feedback starting to change on your team. And that's where you're in like the golden zone there.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And actually, we have great classes, just to give a small plug, on how to ask for feedback and how to receive feedback in our Learning Library Elevate Academy. And I think one note that I'd just like to talk about quickly for a minute or two before we end today is just around double clicking. That's the word I'm looking for. I was going to go dipping, and it's not dipping, it's double dipping on how you receive feedback, and do you do that well? Because we've talked quite a lot today about modeling various things, modeling vulnerability, modeling trust, modeling risk taking, modeling an entrepreneurial mindset, and this is kind of no different really here. You want to model receiving feedback well, i.e., don't be defensive. And that can be really easier said than done. And I just want to give you maybe 3 tips that you can use in order to feel less defensive in the moment if you're not used to hearing a lot of feedback from your team. So the first one is just practicing your active listening. Make sure when they're giving it to you that you're maintaining eye contact, you're avoiding distractions, put your phone away. If it helps you take notes, that can be like a great way of like boosting your active listening, because you're just writing down really the salient points and just making sure that you've understood what they're saying, So let me just make sure I've been completely clear on what you've said and then summarize what you've heard. Or, so let me just double check that I'm hearing you correctly and then summarize what you've heard. So that'd be like tip 1, practice active listening. Tip 2 would be to make sure that you're asking clarifying questions in there. I think if you're getting given feedback and you just go, okay, yep, thank you, understood. It's kind of like, but have they though? So, making sure that you're getting in there, tell me a little bit more about X, Y, and Z, or walk me through what happened or what factors do you think led to this misunderstanding? Help me understand that a bit more. Just try and avoid why questions, like, why did you feel that way? Why did it come across that way? That does tend to elicit a defensive response from the other person. It just sounds a little bit accusatory. So flip that to tell me more about or what factors led to. And the third tip I would say would be to have a little empathy, because the effort and consideration that it takes to come to you as a manager and to give you feedback is quite high and it's quite daunting. And people are most certainly going to mess it up. And so just give your team a little grace as we go through the process of trying to foster this culture of feedback.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Luz. Great tips. All right. This was awesome. Episode 2, so fun. If you would love some advice on your situation, send us an email.
Yes.
We have an email address that will just go to us. So it's Dear L and L at elevateleadership.com. That's Dear L and L at elevateleadership.com. And we'll bring your situation to the show. We promise we will not use your actual name. We have changed all of these names to protect the innocent. But anyway, thanks so much for joining. This is super fun. And we love what we do. And you can find us at elevateleadership.com. And we'll catch you on the next episode of People Are the Worst.
Bye for now.
See ya.